Who raised you more? Your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
At Easter lunch, my grandmother handed out envelopes to everyone but me, and I felt the familiar sting rise in my throat while I kept my face steady, because I have learned that in this family the person who shows it first is the person they point to later as the problem. So I smiled and made a quiet joke about the ham being salty, and I watched the envelopes move like little paper flags from her hand to my cousins and my brother, and even to my cousin's new girlfriend who has known us for roughly 5 minutes, and I kept thinking how it was almost impressive to do it so openly, like the performance was the point, like the message needed to be delivered with no room for confusion. I am not the dramatic one, at least that is what they say when they need me to swallow something, and I have swallowed a lot over the years, starting back when the college checks were for kids who made good choices, which meant my cousin who changed majors 3 times still made good choices, and I, who worked weekends and paid my own rent, somehow did not, and I remember the Christmas when my uncle lectured me about grit while sliding a card with a gift card inside to my brother and telling me that what I really needed was to learn how to network, and how that same uncle will interrupt any conversation about fairness with a speech about tradition and generosity and how grandma does what she wants, as if he is not the one sitting beside her at the head of every table counting heads like an usher with a clicker. The envelopes have always bothered me, not because of the money in them, although yes, it would be nice not to be the only one who pretends that does not matter, but because of what they represent in this family. A quiet ranking system that gets justified with words like loyalty and respect and helping out, and if you listen long enough you learn those words are code for doing what my uncle wants and doing it his way. And I learned that lesson in a very specific way the year he wanted me to help on weekends at his business, just for a season, and I said no because I had my own job, and suddenly I was not dependable, not appreciative, not family in the way they use that word when they are about to exclude you. So when the envelope started moving and eyes slid in my direction to see if I would react, something in me clicked into place. Not a tantrum and not a meltdown, more like a decision that felt overdue, and I told myself I would not plead or perform. I would not give them the scene they could later describe as ungrateful or unhinged. I would give them something else, something that looked small and felt polite and landed exactly where it needed to land, and I could already see how it would work. Because I know my family, I know what they fear, and it is not me yelling at a table, it is me being calm and making other people notice. I waited until the plates were being cleared and the room got loud with overlapping chatter, and I leaned back just enough to lift my phone and open the front camera, and I framed the moment in the most ordinary way possible, not the food, not the table. Just my face with the background blur that hints at a gathering without giving anyone the satisfaction of a tag, and I took one photo with a neutral expression that read as fine to anyone who did not know me and read as sharp to anyone who did. And in the caption box I typed a sentence that was not angry and not accusing yet did not lie about what just happened. Something like holiday traditions are funny, some of us bring dessert, some of us bring jokes, some of us bring envelopes. I guess today I brought the appetite and I hit post to the place where my family watches without admitting they watch. The place my uncle pretends not to understand while commenting on other people's lawn photos at strange hours. I did not tag anyone, and I did not name anyone, and I did not mention money because in my family you can get away with nearly anything if you keep it technically vague, and I will be honest, it felt good to take control of the story without raising my voice. It felt good to decide that I would not stand there while they performed this ritual and pretend it was a misunderstanding, and it felt good to know that the people who have seen me for real, friends who have listened to me replay these moments in parking lots after holidays, would understand exactly what the caption meant, and that the people at the table who keep saying it is not that deep would feel a tug in their stomachs anyway. I stood up, thanked my grandmother for lunch, hugged my mother, ignored the cousin who tried to joke about me being on a health kick to explain why I was not taking home leftovers, and I walked out without asking for a container or pretending I wanted to stay for coffee, and the whole way to my car I felt the kind of calm that comes when you finally stop negotiating with people who have already decided your place. And I told myself I would not check the post until I got home because I wanted the hour to belong to me and not to them, and I turned on the radio and drove in silence, because sometimes the quiet is the loudest way to answer a family that only respects noise when they are the ones making it. By the time I put my keys on the counter and opened my phone, the notifications had started to stack in a way that looked harmless to a stranger and very specific to me. A cousin's like, an old neighbor's "you good" message, a group chat going oddly still. And then the incoming call banner slid across my screen with a name that made me pause in the hallway, because it was not my mother or my brother or even my grandmother. It was my uncle, and I could already hear the tremor in whatever voice he was about to use, as if the caption had reached some nerve I did not know was exposed, and I stood there with my thumb hovering and one clear choice in front of me, because letting it ring would be easy, answering would be better, and either way I knew this. I had finally given them something they could not control, and they were about to show me why that scared them. The call came in before I had even taken off my shoes, and when I saw his name I let it ring twice, because I wanted the pause to do the work that my voice did not need to do. Then I answered with the kind of polite calm that makes people who thrive on control lean forward, and before I could say a full greeting he was crying in that messy, hiccuping way that is half performance and half panic, begging me to delete the post because it was Easter and Grandma's feelings were fragile and people were already texting him, and he was getting tagged in things, and he could not have that right now, and I listened without interrupting because any person who tells you that you should not make a scene is usually terrified of a scene that is not theirs to direct. So I stayed quiet long enough for him to start explaining how the envelopes were just a tradition, and how sometimes someone gets missed, and how maybe I walked away too quickly, and how the caption made it sound like there was favoritism when really there was just a misunderstanding. And when he finally ran out of air I said, very evenly, that I had been sitting right there, and I had watched the envelopes move, and I did not believe I had been missed. And if what he wanted was for me to lie about what happened, then he needed to be clear about that, because my memory did not need editing. He stumbled over a new argument, a practical one this time, saying he had board members from the community following him and church friends who were sensitive and a couple of vendors who watch everything and a client who was old-fashioned and did not like drama. And if I could just take it down now before more eyes landed on it, he would make sure this was fixed. He would swing by with an envelope. He would make it right. He would even add a little extra because it was my birthday month soon and Grandma had just been distracted, and I felt the heat that usually pushes me toward an argument melt into something firmer, a kind of slow clarity. Because he had just said the quiet part out loud, which was that this was not about my hurt feelings or Grandma's dignity or peace on a holiday. It was about optics and connections, and what people who do not live in our house would think if they read between the lines. I told him I appreciated him wanting to fix it, which is true in the same way that you appreciate a storm for showing you where your roof leaks. And then I said that if he needed me to post anything at all to clarify, I wanted him to text me the exact wording he wanted me to use, because I did not want to misquote him or confuse anyone. And he said that was a great idea and he would draft it right now and I could copy and paste, and he blew his nose and apologized for being emotional and repeated the line about Grandma's heart being delicate like I had not heard it the first 3 times, and we hung up with him promising to send me a message within minutes, which was perfect because people who try to manage a story almost never resist the temptation to put their fingerprints all over it. The text came in fast, a little numbered script without numbers since I had asked for exact words, telling me I should say I left early by choice, that I refused a gift because I do not like being fussed over, that this was a silly misunderstanding and we all laughed about it, that I was on a health kick and preferred experiences over cash. And if I really wanted to keep it neutral, I could just say I love my family and holidays are complicated, but we always end up together, and when I did not reply immediately, he followed up with a line about how some things are best handled within the family, and another about, you do not want to make Grandma look bad, then one that said, I can tell you right now if that helps, and I felt the small, steady click of something locking into place because he had delivered the proof of the thing he kept insisting did not exist, which was the choreography, the script, the payment for silence, all wrapped in the careful language of keeping the peace. I took screenshots of everything and I turned off read receipts because I did not need him managing my scrolling in real time. Then I went back to my post and I did not delete it and I did not name anyone and I did not get specific about money or gifts. I just adjusted one small setting so that friends of friends could see it, which sounds petty unless you understand how this family works and how the second circle is the one that makes them sweat, and I added a single long comment that said I was fine and grateful for everyone who checked in, and that family traditions are interesting because they show you what people value, and sometimes the best thing you can do is tell the truth without names and let people decide what they see. Then I pinned the comment and limited replies to people I actually know because I did not need a pile-on, I just needed the pressure to land where it belonged. He texted again asking if I had posted his wording, and I replied that I was still reading, that I wanted to get it right. And I asked a couple of innocent-sounding questions like whether I should include the part about refusing a gift since I had not actually been offered one, and whether he wanted me to say I left early because of a health kick or because of a joke. And while he tried to decide which lie sounded kinder, I posted a simple story with a question box that said whether you have ever been the only person excluded at a family event and what you did about it, which is not an accusation and not a reveal, but it is a mirror, and mirrors do not scream, yet they still make people flinch. By the time the story views started climbing and the first wave of quiet messages from people who have lived their own version of my table moment rolled in, my phone buzzed with another call, and this time it was not my uncle and not my mother and not anyone who normally involves themselves in conflict. It was a number I recognized from a different kind of conversation entirely, the kind where paperwork lives. And as I watched it light up my screen, I realized that whatever my uncle thought he was protecting with tearful speeches and invented scripts was bigger than an envelope and older than Easter lunch, and I answered knowing that for once I was not going to be the one scrambling for the right words. The number that lit up my screen belonged to Linda Farrow, who is one of those practical women you only ever meet in two places, the front desk of a doctor's office or the finance room of a church, and in our town she is the latter. The treasurer for the Benevolence and Scholarship Committee at the church my grandmother never misses, and my uncle never stops name-dropping, and she opened with the kind of careful tone people use when they are trying to treat a bruise without making you flinch, saying she hoped I was well and that she would keep this short because it was a holiday. Then she said that my little caption had been sent to her by two different committee members who wondered whether there was any misunderstanding about the Easter distributions, which were, according to their minutes, intended for all grandchildren in equal measure, and that she was doing her due diligence because the language in the bylaws around regular, customary holiday disbursements required either equal distribution or a documented declination, and my name, for the past few years, had been recorded as declined, which she assumed must be an error because it did not fit the pattern of prior years and, in any case, no one should be marked as declining if they were present and not offered the chance to accept. I stood very still in my kitchen and let her finish, because sometimes silence is not passive, sometimes it is the sound a lock makes right before the door swings, and I told her, with the kind of politeness that leaves no easy escape route, that I had not declined anything, that I had not been asked, that I had no quarrel with the church or the committee, and that my post was not about shaming anyone so much as refusing to pretend something normal had happened when it had not, and she thanked me for being clear and asked, almost apologetically, if I would mind confirming in an email so she could attach it to the file since they had an external review scheduled for early summer and loose ends made those meetings longer than necessary. And I said I would send a note right away, and while I had her, could she also please send me a copy of any forms or notes where I had supposedly declined, because I like to keep accurate records for my own sanity. The first set of scans hit my inbox within minutes, and even before I zoomed in I could see the story they thought they had written, tidy columns for Easter and Christmas and back to school, initials in the margin that matched my cousin's and brother, little checkmarks for received, and by my name a blocky, impatient handwriting that said declined, no initials attached, just that one word repeated across multiple lines like someone in a hurry trying to close a tab they should not have opened. And when I compared the dates to my texts from those years, I found the usual photos from family tables and the predictable caption jokes, which meant I had been there. And I remembered the small awkwardness of leaving with nothing and telling myself not to care, and suddenly those moments were not just petty family slights, they were entries in a ledger being used to balance something I had not been allowed to see. I forwarded the scans to my personal email because I have learned to duplicate anything that might suddenly vanish. Then I drafted a short message to Linda that did not accuse and did not dramatize. It simply stated that I had reviewed the records provided, that I had not declined, that I had not been asked, and that I would appreciate a correction where appropriate, and before hitting send I attached a second file I had titled with today's date, a neat PDF of my uncle's messages offering to sell me to fix optics and proposing that I tell the internet I had refused a gift because I was on a health kick and did not like being fussed over. And I added one line that said I was sharing those messages only to explain why I believed the records may not have been kept in good faith, and that any clarification should be addressed to the committee, not to me privately, because I was not interested in side deals or retroactive narratives. Then I did the pettiest, cleanest, most honest thing I could do, which was to copy the chair of the trustees and the pastor's administrative email, both of which are public and routine and utterly non-dramatic. And I wrote a subject line so bland it read like paperwork, clarification on holiday distribution entries, and I pressed send, and in that moment I felt the jolt you get when you choose a lever that looks small, but is connected to a larger machine. Because there was nothing angry in the email and nothing that could be spun as a tantrum, only the kind of clarity that makes people who live on soft power feel like the room has bright lights again. My uncle called within what felt like one long breath of the send button, and when I let it roll to voicemail, he texted that we could handle this quietly if I would just delete the post and put up his wording and reassure the committee folks that I had laughed it off, and while he typed those lines, which I knew he would, my inbox chirped with Linda's reply, a professional thank you and a note that she had opened a ticket to correct the entries and would suspend further distributions until the committee reviewed the process notes, and that if anyone contacted me directly to pressure me, I should feel free to forward their messages for the file, which I read twice because the phrase suspend further distributions is the single least poetic and most devastating sentence you can drop into a family that has grown addicted to envelopes. I took one more small step because you do not have to shove a house to make it creak, you only have to remove the wedge holding a door in place, so I posted a very neutral update on my original photo, something as simple as appreciate everyone who checked in. I've sent a note to the right people so the records match reality. Holidays are complicated, accountability doesn't have to be, and I locked comments again because I was not hosting a circus, and as I put my phone face down my doorbell rang twice in quick succession, steady and entitled, the kind of ring a person uses when they believe the conversation belongs to them, and when I glanced at the peephole and saw exactly who I expected to see, I knew that whatever I opened next would not be a door so much as the final proof that my quiet had finally become louder than his speeches. I opened the door just enough to make it clear I was present and not enough to suggest I was available for a performance, and my uncle started talking before the second hinge settled, launching into a breathless mix of apology and instruction where he said he hated that I felt hurt and he loved me very much, and this was all a misunderstanding that could be solved if I would just delete one little post and put up the wording he had so thoughtfully prepared, which, he assured me, would protect Grandma, calm the church ladies, and keep certain people from asking questions that would only confuse things, and while he spoke he held out a plain envelope as if we were completing a ritual that had been briefly interrupted by my inconvenient feelings, explaining that he had brought me what should have been handed to you at lunch, along with a little extra because of the birthday month he keeps remembering when it suits him, and I kept my hand on the edge of the door and did not take the envelope because I wanted the moment to be about words, not paper. I told him I appreciated the visit and the concern and the offer to repair the optics, and then I said the only line that mattered, which was that I would not delete the post, I would not publish anything untrue, and I would not accept an envelope to rewrite a story he had already tried to write in committee minutes by marking me down as the girl who keeps declining. And he blinked hard at that because the word minutes does something to men who think they are conducting their business behind curtains, and he tried a softer pitch where he said the committee was informal and the paperwork was just a framework, and sometimes they wrote things down in a way that did not capture the spirit of the moment. And if the church accountant had flagged something, then it was only because people who do not understand family dynamics can be literal, so why not just fix it privately and move on? And I told him that privacy had never been the problem and that truth was not a public spectacle unless you kept forcing it to be one by lying about it. He asked to come inside because, he said, we were attracting attention, and I said we could talk right there because I preferred that any conversation touching money and records, and who said what remain in a place with a memory that did not depend on his recollection. And I did not have to say the words doorbell camera for him to glance up at it and recalibrate his tone, which shifted from coaxing to managerial as he laid out a plan that sounded very much like a script, in which I would post his wording. He would make sure a correction went into the file, distributions would resume, Grandma would be spared any stress, and nobody would need to ask why my line had declined year after year when anyone with eyes knew I had been there. And I let him hear his own logic out loud, because people who rely on pressure rarely realize how naked it sounds without the usual applause. He reached again with the envelope, as if the act of handing it to me would seal the agreement he was building in his head, and I said I would not accept cash from him in exchange for a statement crafted to protect his reputation. But if he wanted to support me, he could send a written acknowledgement to the treasurer and the trustees explaining that my entries had been recorded inaccurately and that any policy going forward would treat all grandchildren equally without exceptions handled at his discretion. And the way his jaw tightened told me I had walked right up to the line he had drawn for years between what he calls generosity and what looks a lot like control. Because the minute I used the words policy and equally and without exceptions, he stopped pretending this was about my feelings and said, in that careful voice he uses when he wants to sound reasonable while being anything but, that I was risking a great deal for what he called internet points, that I did not understand how these things worked, that people who keep doors open for you do not like to feel embarrassed, and that if I kept pushing I would discover that I was not the only one who could call people. I reminded him that I had not called anyone, that the church called me because the records and my caption collided and made a noise he could not muffle, and that if he wanted the noise to stop, the only instrument he could put down was the one he kept playing, which was the habit of writing stories on my behalf and filing them as fact, and I said it all in one steady breath because I did not want him to mistake my calm for hesitation, and then, because I am done with conversations that vanish into fog, I summarized what he had just said and asked him to confirm, repeating that he was asking me to take down a true post, replace it with a false one, accept money as a gesture of unity, and leave the committee records unchallenged so distributions would resume. And he said that was a cynical way to frame a simple family fix, and that if I insisted on making it ugly, he could not help me when the church or the community or certain employers decided I was volatile, and I watched him realize a second too late that the only person who had used threatening language at my door was him. I told him the conversation was over, that any further contact about this matter should be by email with the treasurer copied, that I would not be accepting any envelope, and that I had already forwarded our earlier messages to the committee because transparency was the only thing I trusted here. And he started to protest again just as my phone buzzed with an email notification, and I glanced at the preview and saw Linda's name and the subject line, temporary hold on discretionary reimbursements, pending review, which I knew he could not see but which changed the air anyway because my face must have done something I could not hide, and I said thank you for coming, please leave. And I closed the door slowly so he could feel what the word boundary means when it is not just a slogan in a book club. I forwarded Linda's message to my mother with one short note that said I was fine and that nobody was in trouble except the person who insisted on writing fiction in the minutes. Then I posted a deliberately dull update on my photo thanking friends for caring and reminding everyone that I was not naming anyone and that the right people were handling the records. And before I set my phone down, I took one more clean step that was not loud and not cruel and not even particularly dramatic, which was to send a polite request to the church email asking for access to the past 3 years of committee policies and distribution logs as permitted by their own bylaws. And I copied the trustees again and added a single line that said I prefer not to discuss this by phone and would appreciate written responses only, which is the kind of sentence that looks boring and lands like a gavel. And as I exhaled, I heard my uncle's car leave fast enough to tell me the message had arrived even without a Ringtone, while my inbox pinged again with a second subject line that made my hands steady and my heart settle, because it read special meeting scheduled for Monday morning. Please attend, and if there is one thing my family fears more than a scene, it is a table where everybody gets a copy of the same agenda. The special meeting on Monday was held in the multipurpose room behind the sanctuary, the one with the uneven chairs and the coffee machine that makes more noise than heat, and although I didn't physically walk in or take a seat like the rest of them, because I knew that showing up in person would only shift the attention to my body, my tone, my expression, all the little traps they use to decide who is reasonable and who is emotional, I still attended in the way that mattered most, through the documentation I had submitted, through the language I had chosen with surgical clarity, and through the fact that my presence was now impossible to reduce to a misunderstanding or one girl being dramatic, because when policy meets proof, the story doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room anymore, it belongs to the one who kept the receipts. I had sent everything in advance, the original screenshots of my uncle's messages offering payment for silence, the records showing multiple years of so-called declined entries, the email chain with Linda where I clarified I had never been asked, let alone refused, and my final statement, which I had revised 10 times to make sure there was not a single word that could be twisted into pettiness, simply stated that I supported equal treatment for all family members involved in any church sanctioned distributions, and that I believed the process should be reevaluated for transparency, consistency, and fairness, not just for myself, but for anyone who may not have had the language, patience, or digital trail to defend their absence from the list. I had been told the meeting was just procedural and not disciplinary, which is always what they say when they're trying to reassure the person with power, not the person who's been hurt. And when Linda texted me mid-meeting to say that 2 committee members had excused themselves citing discomfort, I knew the old alliances were wobbling not because they wanted justice, but because they didn't want to be seen in the room when the curtain fell. And what a familiar feeling that was, watching. People care not when something is wrong, but when it is no longer safe to pretend it isn't. What followed that week was not a grand explosion or a viral confrontation or any of the things people expect when they think of revenge, because real revenge, the kind that leaves a mark without leaving blood, is quiet, procedural, and permanent, like changing the locks instead of burning the house down. And by Friday, 3 things had happened that told me the door I cracked open would never fully close again. First, a notice was posted in the church bulletin stating that all family-related distributions would be paused pending policy review and legal counsel. Second, my uncle formally stepped away from the committee, citing stress and a need to prioritize personal matters. And third, an anonymous email landed in my inbox from a cousin I barely speak to, saying that they had gone back through their own records and realized some things didn't add up, and that if I ever needed backup, I wasn't alone. That was the part that stuck with me, not the vindication, not the email threads, not even the stammering apology I eventually received from Grandma herself, who called me on a quiet Wednesday and said she hadn't realized what had been happening because those details were always handled by her uncle. No, it was the quiet message from someone who'd probably never speak up at a holiday table, but who now knew that someone else had finally drawn the line. I didn't go to the next Sunday service, and I didn't answer the cousin who texted me a picture of the empty seat at the head of the committee table, captioned with a joke that tried too hard to be neutral. And I didn't post anything beyond a single sentence on my story that said, sometimes accountability sounds like silence, because I didn't need to gloat, I didn't need to spike the football, and I didn't need to prove I'd won, because the win was already happening in every whispered conversation they were having without me, in every adjusted record, in every envelope they now had to account for, and in every future table where someone might think twice before pretending not to see the person they were leaving out. What mattered wasn't that I'd made them uncomfortable. What mattered was that I had reminded them that I was watching, and more importantly, that I now had proof others were watching too. And there is nothing more terrifying to people who manipulate in the shadows than realizing the light isn't coming, it's already there, and it's not leaving. I never got a replacement envelope, and I never wanted one, The real gift wasn't money. It was leverage. It was clarity. It was the relief of no longer trying to earn a seat at a table that had always used my exclusion as its centerpiece. And it was the quiet understanding that I didn't need to flip the table to win. I just had to make sure everyone finally saw what was on it.